surfing but haven't because you're hours from the nearest beach? In 1958, sidewalk surfing, known today as skateboarding, emerged. This created a way to mimic surfing on land. Over the years, skateboarding has evolved from a harbor for outcasts to a multi-million-dollar industry and one of the top-ranked sports in America. To give an overview of how the culture has evolved over the last 40 years, I will be discussing key determinants within the culture, such as popularity, acceptance with and outside the community, as well as how the influence of mainstream media like the X Games has influenced its evolution. First, let us talk about the popularity of skateboarding, as it has not always been an openly recognized sport. Skateboarding was associated with deviance, carelessness, laziness, and social disruption when it first appeared. The media began molding public perception, and fear shaped people's attitudes towards the industry. Brian Boyd, pictured here, once was ranked number 3 amateur in the country, and he remembers being outcasted and ostracized at school when he became a sponsored amateur and was famous throughout the metropolitan DC area. He said the news school paper once ran an article about him, placing him on the front page, and the school received extensive backlash, including numerous hate mail letters from parents who claimed that the article was a complete waste of paper and should have been used to highlight the talents of real sports like football and baseball. Brian states he only gained acceptance from his fellow classmates once they realized the recognition and fame he was gaining from the sport. He states the same could not be said about his fellow skaters within the school, as they continued to be bullied and harassed. Just as the culture was not very popular in the beginning, they were also not very welcoming. There was an apparent distinguishment between purist skaters and those who were posers. Purist skaters would use a variety of strategies to determine who the posers were, going anywhere from terminology to examining the way that their shoes looked. Brian Boyd recalls asking suspected posers, "Where do you skate at?" to determine if they were legitimate or not. He said more often not, there were a mouthful of excuses, and ultimately what it boiled down to is the posers using skateboarding as a hobby in life instead of it being their lifestyle. He says if you lived it as a lifestyle, you knew the dedicated wardrobe, hairstyles, and vernacular a true skater did. Bullying often occurred within the community by forms of vibing, which is harassing someone based on a number of characteristics, both physically and mentally. Social intimidation and physical intimidation were both forms of vibing out new talent, and Brian Boyd describes showing up at Cedar Crest Skate Park in Washington, D.C., and being a mere grommet who was bullied, shoved around, and wasn't even allowed to drop in on skate ramps until he earned his respect from fellow skaters. As skateboarding began to develop, the culture itself split into different sectors, and segregation among the skating community began to develop. Brian states by the early 1990s, the industry was broken, and while ramp skating was the most popular form of skating, street skating was the only form actually keeping the culture alive. Over the coming years, skateboarding evolved into a mainstream sport and has continued to do so, creating the skateboarding we know today. In the beginning, outside companies struggled to break their way into the selective culture, and they were simply looking for an edge in their corporate approach. Skateboarding appeared to give them the jump-off needed to gain street credibility, and in 1995, the X Games drew unheard of attention to the skateboarding culture. Brian states that the X Games drew specific attention to Tony Hawk, calling Tony the Michael Jordan of skateboarding. 4 years later, skateboarding was deemed an inheritably dangerous sport, which caused a major expansion in skate parks as they were no longer liable for the injuries that occurred. Brian said the X Games and the expansion of skate parks is what caused a major shift in the skateboarding culture. Skateboarding began drawing more and more people, as well as major companies like Nike, Adidas, Converse, Rockstar, and Monster energy drinks. At first, these large companies had a hard time getting into the industry, and those within the industry saw partnering with these major companies as a way of selling out. The purist skateboarders would have nothing to do with these companies' attempts to enter this industry. However, as skaters realized that skateboarding would provide a way of living, they became more enticed by these companies' large offers of money for sponsorships. In the 80s, the largest sponsorship you could have would be a board sponsor, where you earned merely $2 per board royalties. Fast forward to 2021, and most major competitors don't even have a board sponsor because they earn all of their money simply by wearing their clothing from their sponsors and being successful. As you can see, the transition of from brotherhood of outcasts to becoming a mainstream sport has been evident in the changes throughout the culture. Popularity, acceptance, and expansion have all contributed to the growth and mainstreaming of the skateboarding culture, and by understanding the impacts these factors have on skateboarding, you can begin to see the way evolution continues to change even the purest of cultures. While skateboarding was once a strong brotherhood of outcasts and anti-establishment mentality, skateboarding fell prey to the same flaws and began to eat their own as society does. Despite this, though, skateboarding remains raw and real and seems to continue to grow and attract others to its culture.